Handy Quilts in lovely scenic Gaston, Indiana, and today we're finishing step 7 to Harmony Block of the Month. This is the one where we put our Lone Star together, and I swear if you just know a few tricks and follow along step by step, yours will look just like this. So gather up all your supplies. Here we go. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get to this. So this is the big square that we're going to use for our finished Lone Star. It's part of the setting square. And have you ever had a piece of fabric that's too big to cut with your biggest ruler? So that's a 24-inch ruler in front there. And up here, right up here, is a short ruler. So what I've done is I've butted them up together so that I can cut along the length. So this has to be squished together, and then it has to go corner to corner, and you can cut the entire length. Okay, I've cut my first part. You can see that right here, that it is cut. And I want to go the other direction. So I have the rulers going the other direction, but if you notice, I have not lifted up my fabric. This is going to keep it nice and square for you to make that second cut. So move your body, not the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and take that second cut. Try to be real careful when I get up to where the rulers are butted up together, so to make sure that they're even. And that is how you get your 4 triangles. Well, okay, now we're going to take a whole bunch of parts and make them into one big, beautiful block. So the first thing you need to do is grab a hold of your 4 applique blocks and the 4 triangles that we just did in the last step, and all 8 of your star points. And what we need to do is make some marks, because when you do a Lone Star, you have to go from point to point, and we're not going from edge to edge in most cases. So let's start with the triangles. And what I'm going to do, this is the front. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to the back. And then I'm going to take a good 1/4 inch ruler. I'm going to place it along the outside edge of the point. And I'm going to make a mark with my friction pin. Now you could use pencil or chalk. I know that you can see the friction pin on here, and it is on the back, and it is in the seam allowance, so it's just gonna disappear when it's washed. And what I did is I went down each side and I made an X, which is a point that's a 1/4 inch in from the edge. Let's see if we can get this closer. You see that? So I want you to make that mark on each of the triangles. And on the back of the applique squares, I want you to turn those over to the back with the stem of the flower down here at the bottom. I want you to do the same thing on one point. That stem point at a 1/4 inch. So there you can see that one. Let's pull that up. And then on the star points, we're going to need 3 marks. So the first one is going to be down here at the bottom of the star point, the center where you have your main floral. So we're going to make an X down here at the bottom. but we also need it up here and up here, not at the very point. That doesn't matter, but we need it on each side. And we're going to be doing things in a slightly different order than she does, because I think it makes one of the seams simpler. When you're doing this many matchy seams, you need a little bit of help. So I'm going to show you how I put together a Lone Star that takes a little bit of the stress out of it. Max is sitting down here on the floor. That's my dog, and he's watching you, and he's saying that you're doing just fine. So what I want you to do is to mark each of your pieces that way, and then we'll be right back to start sewing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make pairs of points. So we are going to start with putting 2 together, and we're going to make 4 pairs. So you're going to match up your points and turn right over left, and you're going to match these X's on both sides, the X's in the middle, so right here, and then you're going to align all of your points from your piecing so that it ends up continuous. So let's pin that, and then I'm going to walk you through sewing this the first time. All right, I have my first set pinned together, and as you can see, I have matched the marks at the end and at this end. And then I have matched every single seam, every single one. And this time it's not offset, it's straight, so it's easier to get those together. And now I'm going to sew from this point to the bottom point, and I'll show you how that goes. So we're going to use something that we don't use very often in quilting, and that's the fixed stitch. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find that first point where the 2 X's mark, and I'm going to put my needle down right in there and take out that pin. And I want needle down so that I'm sure that I'm in the right place, because we have to leave it open a 1/4 inch at each end so that we can inset. We're doing inset seams, so we can inset the triangle. So I'm going to do a lock stitch. If you are using back stitch, then you'll want to start a couple of stitches up and back stitch if you don't have a lock stitch on your machine. And I am just going to sew down this seam. Let me tell you something that happens because of how our brains work. If you notice, this is getting smaller on the way down, right? Because we're going to a point. And your brain wants you to compensate for that. So sometimes you might notice that you're trying to make your seam thinner at the point than you were up at the top. So if you're trying to do that, really concentrate on staying at a 1/4 inch, because otherwise you'll have a big poof in the center. So you have to take a full 1/4 inch all the way down. We call those sombreros when we long arm. So now I'm going to go right to the point that I marked. One more stitch, I think. And then I'm going to do a lock stitch again. And this partial seam or inset seam will be open at the bottom and the corner where we're going to put in our triangle. So when I open this up, if luck is with me, then those points just look perfect. I think they look pretty darn good. And then I personally prefer to go to the right because I'm right-handed, so I'm going to press these seams to the right. So you want to make 4 pairs of these, and you want to make sure that it's open 1/4 of an inch at the point and 1/4 of an inch up here for our inset seam. So make 4 2-pointed units. Okay, so I have one of my pairs here sewn together. You can see the points coming nicely together. Aren't those pretty? If you get all this right, then when you go to put this together in the center, it just lines up like a breeze. So now I'm going to scoot it down so that you can see the triangular opening. I'm going to take one of the triangles that we cut and I'm going to put it down right side up. And you will notice that it extends way out there. That's because we are going to trim when we're finished. So we oversize this and then trim it at the end and it'll be perfect. So once it's right side up, the first thing I'm going to do is fold it over onto the left-hand side. And I am going to match up the X with where my stitching stopped, or the X on the other side. And then I'm going to pin all the way down. And for the next part, I'm going to take you over to the sewing machine and show you how to do this so that it just comes out perfect. Okay, here we go. So I have it all pinned with the triangle up because I want to see that mark. And I am going to start from the edge. And in this case, you don't have to start 1/2 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch in because the next seam won't be inset. And I am going to, well, not at that end anyway. I am going to sew all the way to the center, keeping a good 1/4 of an inch all the way down. And as I come to the center where the X is, I'm going to pull this piece, the right hand one, out of the way so I don't catch the seam allowance, and I am going right to the mark. One more stitch, I think. And then I'm going to fix the seam again, just like we did before. Normally we don't fix seams because we sew over the next seam with our next piece. But when you're doing inset seams or partial seams, then you don't want to do it that way because it'll come undone because you aren't sewing over anything else. Now that I have the triangle sewn on one side, I'm going to take it and flip it and then I'm going to reach in and pull the diamond points out because we don't want to sew over those. See how that diamond is flipped all the way out? So it's not under there at all. And then I'm going to pin down this way and I'm going to start from the mark that I made and I'm going to sew all the way to the end. So you are going to make 4 sets just like this. So on this one you sew from here all the way to the end, and you will notice that your Lone Star points don't make it to the end, and that's just fine. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. So sew those, and you need to make 4 units like this. Here is one of my units, and I wanted to point out a couple of things. If you notice right here at that point, do you notice how flat that lays? That's really important. If you have some sort of a hump going on there, it means you've probably stitched too far because your stitching should just meet and should never overlap. So fix it now because the farther you go, the worse it gets, and it'll be harder to fix. And the other thing is, I'm going to turn this over. I press my triangles down toward the piecing. for a couple of reasons. The first is right here, it makes it nice and flat, where if you fold everything up like this, you end up with quite a little lump right there, so I don't want to do that. And I think it's just a little easier to press down towards your piece. If you notice, remember I told you I always go to the right, which now means this is to the left because it's turned over. And all of my pieces go the same way, and I want to make sure that it's pulled over and flat. So your next piece that you're adding is going to be the applique piece, and this is way easier. So here's my applique piece, and my point is going down and out of the way. So this point is down, and I have it straight up with the applique piece, and you're going to do this the same on every one, is facing in toward the point. So the stem end is down here. And some of this is going to be trimmed off, so it won't be obvious. It'll look more centered when we're done. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the applique piece and flip it over. And we're going to line it up with the top of the triangle. And we're going to match the points right here. This is the important point. So we're going to sew from the top and sew down the edge and stop in that point so that's still open by 1/4 of an inch. So when we put our pieces together, we'll be able to inset right there. So you've got the method down now, so let's pin and sew from the top and stop in the point. Make 4 of these. As I was pinning this, I realized I might need to give you just a little more instruction. So just as a heads up, when you match your points down here at the bottom, this little point doesn't match the other point. It kind of hangs off a little bit. But it'll be right after you sew it, because you'll be coming in 1/4 of an inch. And then up here at the top, since the triangle is oversized, it of course doesn't match. And if this bothers you when you're trying to sew, and it would be bulk anyway, go ahead and just trim that little corner off. And that way you'll have a straight seam. Okay. Oh my goodness, we're getting pretty close. So now we have 4 units like the one that I have sitting there, and we're going to start putting those units together. So to do that, I've grabbed a second unit here. Just not enough camera space. Can you still see? Yep. Okay, so now we're going to put 2 units together to make a half. So I have taken the units and matched the centers, and the square will go up on the triangle the next time. And I want to line this one up and sew this one first. So I'm going to flop that over. You can see my points are still on there. And I am going to sew from this point to this point. And then we'll finish that area. So we've been doing this all along. I know you can do it. So this little X should center up on the seam. And if you are pressing all of your, if you pressed all of your diamond points the right way, the same way, it doesn't matter if it's right or left, it just needs to be the same, then these should nest, and that will make it real easy to put this together. But you still stop 1/4 inch away. So let's get that sewn. So I have the first part of that seam sewn. Notice that my square is still hanging out in space here, but I wanted to get the hard part done first and make sure that it matches. So as you can see, all of my seams have matched, and if I get right down here into the point, you can see that those just snug up so nice because I pressed all of the sets of 2 of the diamond points to the right, they're all going to nest together, and it makes it so much easier to hit that point. Now we're going to go back up here, and we need to sew this seam, which is the easier one, so I'm going to flip this up, and then I'm going to line this up, pulling down a little bit so that this little bit of seam allowance comes out there so that I'm not sewing over it. And I'm going to sew from the point all the way out. Again, you want to get rid of this extra bit here on the side, so you'll take a ruler and cut that off so you don't have the bulk. So we're going to do that, make 2 of these, and then we only have one more thing to do. Oh my goodness, we are down to the last 2 halves. Yes! So I wanted to show you on the first half. First of all, that all of these seams match. I'm sure you can't see that because it's so blendy, but these seams just nest together perfectly. And when you put the 2 halves together, turn this over, you want to press that seam, this one right here, in the same direction as the other seams, and that will make your 2 halves go together perfectly. And the other thing that I want to show you is up here on the square, I have again pressed out away from the square. Pretty simple, huh? That makes all of your points just lay down so nice. So now we're going to put the 2 halves together. So let me grab the other half here. And the first thing we're going to do is line up the center, because this is the important part, right? You want your star points and all of those seams on the Lone Star to line up. So you're going to match your points here. We pull it to the left. Your square's hanging out in space, and you're going to sew this center seam right across the bottom there and end at the other square. Now line up those X's that you made on each end and sew the center, and make sure the center where all of the floral comes together, all of those seams are nested together. Sew that first, then you're going to flip out the edges just like you've done, and you're going to sew each square on, and then you're done except for trimming. So hang on just a second and I'll show you the final product. So I'm dying to know, how did it feel when all of those seams in the center just nested up perfectly and your point comes to a perfect point? That's pretty cool, isn't it? So here is our finished center medallion. You scoot back a little bit here. And I have it draped over the side of my table, but if you lay this out on the floor, it should be flat. If you have a sombrero effect in the center, then you need to stop right now and fix those center seams before you go any further, because that is like impossible to really quilt out well. And you also want to check your seams to make sure that everything matches all the way down, because now is the time to fix that. And double check your points of your triangles and your points of your applique blocks right here to make sure there isn't any hooping or gathering, because you're going to want to fix that right now. Now you're going to trim this according to the directions in the book, and you probably do not have a mat that big. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you want to make sure when you're trimming that you don't go any less than 1/4 of an inch away from your star points, because you don't want to lose your star points. So make sure that you're double checking that. And what I would do is take my regular mat and put it on a big table, or worst case scenario, lay it on the floor and measure that way, and that way you can slide your mat down to where you're going to trim. So make sure and get this even on both sides. So however much you have to leave here, make sure you're leaving the same amount on the other side, but you still end up with the center block the correct size. So that is the center medallion. In our next segment, we're going to be doing the pieced borders. And then we just have the outside borders, and then you're ready to take it to the long armor. So I think you did great. Max thinks you did great. It's not as hard as you think, is it? It's just not. So I will see you next time with our pieced borders.